Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mom Strength. I'm Surabhi Veitch, your host, and I am so honored and grateful to bring on Selam Debs to my podcast today. Let me just tell you about Selam. So I've followed her for a while, I don't even know how long. I literally started coming on Instagram more 2.5 years ago when I was pregnant with my second child, and it was the pandemic and everyone was going online. That's when I started, and I started following and seeking out people who felt in alignment with my values, in alignment with my view in the world. And Salam is a very powerful anti-racism educator, but she's so much more. So let me tell you a little bit about her. Salam is a Black Ethiopian queer woman, an anti-racism educator and anti-oppression coach, a social justice advocate, a student in dismantling anti-Black racism, an accomplice in dismantling anti-Indigenous racism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and an advocate in two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, plus, and disability rights through an intersectional lens. Now, she's more than that. She's a mother, first and foremost. She's a founder of Juicy Yoga. That is a yoga studio in Waterloo. And I have a history with Waterloo too, because I did my undergraduate degree there many years ago. So she's also a yoga and meditation instructor, a restorative yoga teacher trainer, a holistic life coach, a Reiki master, and a Lululemon ambassador. I feel like Salam must be like 100 because I don't know how you fit all of these years of experience and training. Literally, I'm like, holy crap, what am I doing with my life? But yeah, and she sings. You sing in your stories and you have a magical voice, and it is healing hearing you sing. And when I hear it, especially in the morning, I'm just like, what a nice way to start the day. I don't have any singing skills. I did vocal lessons for years. My mom thought I was great. I'm not. So I really do appreciate your singing and sharing that gift with us. You're a songwriter, a poet, a practitioner of self-acceptance, self-love, and radical compassion. Salam's anti-racism work is rooted in the understanding that we must acknowledge and identify the insidiousness of white supremacy before we can dismantle colonial belief systems. And that white supremacy exists in all of us, not just in white folks. And the process of undoing, unlearning, and re-educating is necessary for white communities in particular to embark on to support the healing journey for our racialized communities. Salam is also a board member of Project UP. Is that right?
Yeah.
UP and Sexual Assault Support Center of Waterloo Region and Women's Entrepreneur Center of Laurier University. So Salam, welcome on to Mom Strength. I'm so honored and grateful to have you here today.
Surabhi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for bringing me on. I love everything you do. So it's so good to be here.
So tell me a little bit about yourself. I know you have a son. Tell me about your experience into parenting and into the work that you do now. You can start as long ago as you want, maybe when you were born. It's totally free for all.
Yeah, I typically start a couple decades ago, and maybe even longer than that. My parents are both Ethiopian, from Tigray, Ethiopia, actually. We're from the northern part of Ethiopia, which is currently experiencing a 2-year genocide, not televised in the media often. And my family went from separately. My parents didn't know each other, but they both moved. It was very typical to move from Ethiopia because of the civil unrest to Sudan. And then from Sudan, they met and then moved to Amman, Jordan. And I was born in Amman, Jordan. And then they came to so-called Canada for a better life. They came here to create a better life. I was very young when we came here. I was 2 years old and grew up with my mother, a single mother in Regent Park and in Scarborough, Warden and St. Clair, and Cataraqui for Valley, and grew up in those communities. And I watched my mom work 2 or 3 jobs, work night shift, I had to get to school on my own. I had to figure out everything, grew up very quickly. And I watched her work and, really break her back to try to provide for us, for myself, and then my sister, who was born when I was 9 years old. And so My mom then, at a young age, I survived being molested at the age of 9, and then being put into the child welfare system for a period of time, coming back into my family dynamic, and then, obviously all of that playing out in all of the ways in which not only systemic racism, like growing up in disinvested communities that are cockroach infested, being a survivor of abuse. And then my mom was like, okay, I'm going to create a better life for my children. So let's move them to Kitchener-Waterloo. There was a growing Ethiopian and Eritrean community. So let's go there. And that should be a much, safer place to live. And we lived in the same type of disinvested communities, in Paulander and Chandler Mowat. And I, at the age of 16 in high school, was raped and then experienced, being downstreamed in terms of academics, and didn't get access then to university. And so all of this, and my mom thinking that she was creating this better life for us by coming to KW, and really actually it was the worst type of racism I ever experienced. Kitchener-Waterloo is a very German Mennonite community, a very white community. At least in Scarborough and Regent Park, you saw a lot of Black and brown people. You were mostly 99% around brown and Black people, so you had that community, right? And so that led me to finally, trying to navigate all of that, not realizing what had happened to me, and not recognizing the trauma that I had gone through, whether it be police violence and being thrown off of a bus in Ottawa when I was there and handcuffed for no reason, and watching my friend have their knees in his back, whether it be the systemic racism, being downstream, surviving abuse, all of these things. I finally then, at the age of 21, had my son and found out I was pregnant. And, I think for a lot of people, especially in our communities, in Ethiopian communities, it was like shame and how could this happen? But for me, it was like my greatest blessing. It really was. I knew intuitively, and that's one thing I think has been my saving grace, is that I've always had a deep connection to spirit. And even when all of the things have been happening around me, there's this inner awareness. And I knew that it was actually going to transform my life. And so I had this beautiful boy. And this little boy led me to meditation, which led me to yoga, which led me to therapy, which led me to healing work, and which really has led me to where I am today. And he's 17 years old. Don't be fooled. Don't be fooled by.
I know. I'm just like, okay, first of all, the experience would make you at 100. And then your life, like you look very young, but also this is one thing that I have been thinking about, because the people will tell me I look young, but I'm like, that's because your looks is based on whiteness. Yeah. But if you compare me to other Indian folk, I look my age, right? It's just when we compare everything to white norms, yeah, you look young, or you this, or you that. And it's like, but there's no standard. There's no standard. And, I want to step back a little bit and just talk about when you grow up. And my parents moved here for a better life as well. And we had a great life in India. Yes, there's the pollution, and yes, there's whatever else, traffic and whatnot. And there's a lot of stress. People in Mumbai, India, they work long days, like way, way more than people here, right? And like, because they have to survive, and there's a lot of competition. So there is stress. But they came here thinking there'd be more opportunities and more ease of life. And that is the exact opposite of what they've gotten. And a lot of people don't recognize that. They think everyone is here from Black and brown countries because of a war, or they're refugees, or they're like, their life back home is awful. But like, we had maids, we had help, we had nannies. Like, there's none of that here. And my parents are still in their 70s, still working, right? Like, they're going to be working till they're very old because they can't afford not to. And for you growing up in Regent Park, I'm from Toronto. I went to school around, not in Scarborough, but like border or on North York, Scarborough. And when you grow up in a disadvantaged area, like, you are forced to grow up quickly, and it's not your fault, right? Like, people have a lot of blame, like, oh, these parents aren't caring for their children. They obviously care, but they have to work and they have to pay the bills. And so children are forced to kind of be independent much earlier on. And, it's It's sad and it is happening. So we need to talk about it. And I'm grateful for you for sharing those experiences and moving to KW. Like, I know Waterloo is not very, I don't know how it is now in 2022, but like back when I went to school, it was 2004, right? And everyone was like, "Oh, Waterloo's so multicultural." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I came from North York. Waterloo is very white, very, very white.
Mm-hmm.
And the culture is very white. So I can see how it would have been a huge culture shock moving out of Regent Park to, community that's predominantly white and German and Mennonite and um, being so out of place
Racist.
there.
Yeah.
And racist. Yeah. Like, let's just call it what it
Overtly,
is.
overtly racist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when you became pregnant with your son, and I love that spiritual connection and like knowing that this was the right decision for you, did you face a lot of backlash? You mentioned in your community you did. There's a lot of shame and stigma. How about, just in the outer world? Were you working at that point? What was your life like at that point?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm
Yeah.
thinking, I'm sorry to interrupt, but my life at 21, I did not know what I was doing. I'll just tell you. Yeah.
And neither did I. I did not know what I was doing, but I think it definitely placed me on a different track and a path, and I think my path that I recognized once I had him, something kind of clicked in my brain where I was like, I need to interrupt cycles of trauma. I don't know where it came from or what book I read or how it happened, but it was almost like innately, I was like,
Yes.
oh, I'm looking at things that I never thought about. I never thought about my abuse up until the point my son was born. It was like
Wow.
something ignited in me, and I, had difficult conversations with my mom, and I had difficult conversations with people in my life where I started to talk about that because I felt this deep sense of protection for him, and also a sense of like empowerment for myself. And in the world, I was obviously experiencing a lot of stereotypes. I remember that when I went for this second week visit where you go in with, you come in with the baby and they check to see everything's okay and all the things. And the nurse, I'll never forget, she said to me, and I think I was just wearing, it was the style at that time was like, those shirts that were kind of, they were tight on your chest, but then they flowed open.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have a lot of money. I wasn't buying maternity clothes. I just bought whatever I could,
Yeah.
whatever was in style, and I bought it. And it
Yeah.
worked. So it, covered my belly. And she said, you're really going to have to start acting like an adult and like a mother, and stop going to nightclubs and partying and start being a mother, and grow up. And I was like, pardon me, what? Because I cared for myself, because I didn't come out in pajamas a week later.
Yeah.
But that's part of our culture, part of our Ethiopian culture, and part of, I think, a lot of African, Black, Brown, Asian cultures is that we do take a really strong sense of pride in ourselves. And so, there was that stereotype that maybe I'm even younger than I am, the stereotype that I'm irresponsible, the stereotype that I, don't know how to take care of my child, or that I am, incapable.
Or like leaving him to go party, right? Like, what? And like, for anybody who's had a child, you're in a very vulnerable state postpartum. Like, I almost think about it like the womb. Like, I'm not sure what type of birth you had, but like, whether it's a vaginal or cesarean birth, like you're open and you're healing and your uterus is kind of shrinking and you're in this open, vulnerable state. Your baby in the first 2 months of their life, there's a lot of development. And to hear traumatic words like that is so painful. And I'm sorry that you had that experience, because that is, as any nurse person working with pregnant folks, check your bias, and not even your bias, your hate, because that is a judgment. It wasn't like she was asking you, "Oh, what's your life like right now?" There was no question. And there's just an outward judgment and based on her own presumptions. And that is so far from the truth.
Absolutely. And I think experiences like that,
Yeah.
and, overt racist experiences of, being in spaces and people saying really harmful things about my culture, or, telling me that I should make sure that I don't date Black men and I should date white men, and that white men are safer and you'll have better experience. There was a lot. And I think when I look back at that time, I learned how to just survive
Yeah.
all of the violence and the hate
Yeah.
and persevere and build resilience through it. Like you were sharing around growing up in disinvested communities, you just learn how to survive it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until way, way later in my life that I started to then peel back another layer, an onion, and be like, ooh, that's a
Like
lot.
actually processing it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like one of the things that I talked to my with my therapist is like she asked me when I first started working with her, like, why now? Right. And I was like, I don't know. I just, I feel like I need this. And she's like, a lot of the times it's because you're finally actually in a safe space where you feel ready. And I was like, I didn't even realize that because prior to that, I did not feel like I was in a safe mental or physical space to actually start processing the years of hurt, harm, trauma. And with a young child, it is hard to then raise that child, especially as a single mom, and then also process your own trauma. That is hard. How old was your son when you started investing more energy and like creating space for that?
Yeah, I think my son was probably around maybe 3 or so when I started that process. And, my aunt was actually transitioning, and was surviving cancer for many years and was now transitioning. And I'll never forget, my cousin reached out to me and he was like, come down to Ottawa. We're going to, surround her with love, and we're going to surround her with meditation, and we're going to do all types of meditation practices to support her. And it was the first time I was really introduced to, that type of practice. And so I was introduced to that kind of, introspection, or that, space in a place of sacredness, right?
Yeah.
Which is why for me, healing practices and activism and yoga, meditation and prayer and all of these things are so deeply sacred for me, and why it's frustrating to see it, being co-opted and whitewashed and, harmed and taken and stolen. And so that was my process of starting that, because I grew up actually extremely religious and spiritual, but by choice. It was never forced upon me. My parents never said like, oh, you need to go to church. And I really was always seeking at a very, very young age. And so my seeking has always stayed the same. It's just how I'm, the tools that I'm using to bring about that awareness is evolving continuously.
And I love that. It kind of reminds me of when my grandmother passed on, and we're Hindu, and it was in Hinduism, death is normal, right? It's just you're transitioning to a different state where you're closer to God, and it's talked about like a normal thing, which it is normal, right? Everyone who is born will at some point die, and it's like a normal transition to the next thing. And when she passed away, we were very close. We shared a room together, and it was it sounds weird, but it's the most beautiful ceremony to kind of send her off. And that was my reintroduction to Hinduism, because I had pushed it away for so long because of whiteness, to be honest. It wasn't Christian. It was weird. The temple, it was, different culture, different clothes, different rituals. And I pushed it away. And I used to think it was because of my parents forcing it on me that I pushed it away, but they never really forced it on me. They were just hurting that their children weren't invested in what their culture was. And they didn't do their own years of therapy to recognize that. And so I think now as an adult, I recognize it. And my grandmother's death has brought me a lot of healing, because I've reinvested my time and energy into understanding more of my culture, and the yoga and the meditation and the like staying present and being, instead of like fighting the truth and what's happening, is kind of like being with it. And I love that you've had a similar experience with your aunt. And as a mom, as a single mom, a Black single mom raising a Black boy, can you tell me about what that journey has been like? Because it couldn't have been easy in Kitchener-Waterloo, especially. Were you the only Black family? Were there other Black families around you?
Yeah, you know, because we were in disinvested communities, we were
Mm,
around Black and brown people, of course. And so we had our own little insulated, you know, community. It was more when you went outside of your community and, you know, you're in high school or you're in, and as I grew up and was in other spaces and workspaces, that I think, you know, I didn't really have my first real friendship with like a white person until like, I would say grade 12. And then it kind of like lingered, and then it was into the work world. And when I was in the work
mm.
world and, you know, had those relationships where you're like engaging and being in relationship with white folks. But of course we all grew up watching all of the shows and consuming all of the indoctrination of who you should be and who you shouldn't be. And so raising my son, I knew that I wanted to raise him with his culture. I knew I wanted to raise him to love himself. And I thought I was doing a good job at that. I thought that I was like investing all of that in him and pouring that into him. And then I'll never forget, at the age of 4, you know, he came to me and he was like, "Mommy, I wish you called me Zach instead of Jaleel. Mommy, I wish my hair was straight instead of afro or curly. Mommy, I wish my skin was white instead of brown." And
Wow.
I remember just being so like it hurt me so deeply.
That's like a dagger. Like that's, yeah.
I was like, how did this happen? Even after I've poured, like, he's grown up with his culture, he's grown up around other Black and brown people. But it was because the society, like the space, KW, and I think in general, where we
In
live,
general.
yeah, in the world, we constantly are receiving that messaging. And the messaging is that you're inferior and that the goal is to always, you know, is always to immolate whiteness, right? And whiteness is superior. It's more intelligent, it's better, it's cleaner, it's safer, it's, you know, all of the things. And so that led me down a journey where I was like, okay, I really have to, you know, be even more of an advocate. And I think through that process and then him going into school is when it hit me. I was like, oh, these teachers don't all love my child. And they are not all going to, they don't all see him in the light that I see him.
Yeah.
And so I started experiencing, I'll never forget, and I think it was in grade 1, where you had a teacher who was so incredibly harmful. And literally, it was grade 1 and 2 who treated him like he was this troublemaker, disruptive kid, when literally anyone that knows Jaleel from day one, like, he is the most kindest, most caring.
I
And he's a
met him like once at the Trevor Noah show. He gives off a very like calm, like gentle soul vibe, you know?
yeah,
Yeah.
he's an easy kid. He's a very lovable kid. And so I started experiencing this thing where he would come home every day and say to me, like, "Mommy, I keep getting told I have to go in the hallway. Mommy, I keep getting in trouble. Like, I keep,"
What?
yeah. And so this kept happening and kept happening. And at first, I think I inherited a lot of the things that my mom, you know, immigrant parents teach us, which is like, just be good and don't make any mistakes and don't disrupt and everything should be fine. Because our parents did that in survival, right? And they were taught to like bow down to educators and see them as authority. But then I started to realize, and other white parents actually said to me, like, your son is being targeted, like, because he's Black. Like, we can sense it, we can see it. And started this journey of finally telling him. I'll never forget, I said to him one day, I said, "Jaleel, when you go into school tomorrow, stand up for yourself." And I said, "Don't be disrespectful, don't say anything harmful, but stand up for yourself." Because I wanted to teach him that, because at this point, she'd really broken his spirit. And he stopped really, he wasn't finding joy in school. And so I started there, and he went to school the next day. And the teacher did what she always did, was she said to, he was helping a student, and she said, "Jaleel, stop disrupting the class." And he sat down, and she said, "Don't roll your eyes at me." And he was like, "Madame, I haven't rolled your eyes at me, at you. Mind you, this is French immersion, and
Mhm.
that's another conversation."
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the racism in French spaces.
Yes.
And she said, "Yes, you did." And he said, "No, I didn't." And she said, "Yes, you did." So the first time he stood up for himself, and he said, "No, I didn't, madame." And she said, "Get in the hallway right now." And when he was in the hallway, he was crying. And she said to him, "Why are you crying? Stop crying. Like, you should be apologizing to me," she said,
As a
for,
teacher?
Mm-hmm. And this kind of thing happened, and eventually I stepped in right after that, and she ended up being moved because it was it was many different things that I had to record and get receipts of to finally be able to make my case.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that, was my experience of seeing the way the world saw my son as a Black boy and having to advocate for him. And I haven't stopped advocating. He's 17 years old. He's in grade 12 and it's still happening.
And, I always thought as an immigrant that it was because I wasn't born here. I wasn't seen as like Canadian enough, but like he was born here and still, that to me, it's not like, oh, you have an accent or you're different. Like you're literally just being a racist. And does he now, because he's 17, does he remember those early traumas that has happened, like those early memories of, being shamed in class or being targeted in class? How does he, as a child, because he's still a child, how does he kind of process that? I'm so
Yeah,
curious.
and I appreciate you saying that he's still a child, and
He's
that's
only
a really
17.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think, people try to adultify, Black children, and they try to treat them as, people will say, "Oh, he's a strong young man," and I'm like, "No, he's a kid. He's still a kid.
Still
He's
a
still a
kid.
child."
Yeah.
He still remembers everything. He remembers all of it. He remembers what happened when he was little. Even a couple of years ago, right before COVID, there was an incident where all of the Black youth were going to this special conference, and it was a way to address anti-Black racism, giving them a space where they could feel loved and feel encouraged and have mentors. And one of the students, non-Black student, wrote a Snapchat saying that, great, the Black youth are gone, hashtag N-words are gone, hashtag epic. And yeah,
Wow.
so that experience, and I think what I've been trying to support Jaleel in is like recognizing all of the internalized racism, because helping him see that, helping him understand the impacts of that, helping him see that he has a right to feel upset about it, to feel hurt by it, to feel grief around it, to feel sadness about it, around not seeing a lot of folks that look like you don't see a lot of Black, brown folks, and not and going through a whole lifetime of curriculum and never really seeing yourself.
Yeah.
That's trauma.
That is trauma.
Yeah.
I remember, and that's something that, because I grew up in India, I feel like I was 8 when I left India. I lived in Bahrain in the Middle East till I was 10, but in Bahrain it was Indian curriculum. So I learned like Indian history, but it wasn't just when you learn Indian history, you also learn world history. You don't learn just India, and like you learn about the British and colonization. You learn all that stuff. And granted, there's biases there too. I'm sure of that. But I was shocked when I moved here. People didn't know where India was. I was like, the ignorance. I remember in grade 10, grade 11, world history class, my teacher was Quebecois, and he was actually really good. I was the smartest kid in the class, but I played the role of class clown, because then if I was too smart, people wanted to cheat on me and people would get me to do their homework. And so I learned, okay, I'll just play the silly, goofy person and people think I'm not as smart as I am. And then somebody was making fun of me and he was like, stop it. She's getting the highest mark in the class and you're making fun of her. And like he called them out. And then we were talking. And so I felt like, okay, this is a safe space. So we were talking about race somehow, and how the damage of like white, colonization and like the forefathers and stuff. And my white friend started crying in class saying, I just feel like we're always, painted as the villains, and, my grandfather, great grandfather, whatever it was. And literally the entire class stopped to focus on the sad white girl's tears. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, but we still need to learn the history, but we didn't talk about it after that day. So they changed the entire lecture, the entire what is learned, because there's a hint of a white woman being uncomfortable. And that's when I saw this is like somebody I was friends with through class and stuff. And I saw the power of whiteness and white women tears
Mm-hmm.
and how they weaponize it to get what they want and to pacify their feelings and soothe their feelings. And, you know, it was harmful to me that day. I'll never forget that day because I remembered that we were just learning about the harm of colonization in India, in, all over the world, really.
Mhm.
But that conversation didn't matter because one single white person was uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
you internalize that. Your son has, internalized years of being taught white history, white authors. There was an Afrocentric school in Toronto being
Mhm.
suggested. And I remember there was huge uproar.
Oh
Oh,
yeah.
this is segregation again. And I was like, but they need the space, because I went to school, I had Black friends and they were constantly targeted. For
Yep.
sure, I can say that. Sent out, made to do extra laps because, like, I remember one of my close friends, she was bullied because she's Black. She's actually Black and white, but she identified as more Black or,
Mhm.
biracial. And um, she was bullied for her size and she got upset about it. And then she was made to run extra laps in gym
Sure.
class, not the person who was making the racist remarks. And so
Mhm.
growing up as a brown person, seeing all of these injustices, you learn, okay, how do I survive? By emulating this. And it's it's everywhere, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's no escape of it. And the story that you share about the white women's tears, I literally had that experience just literally yesterday. Being in a space and in a space that's actually supposed to be about education, and supporting children, aka kind of like, parent council
Yeah.
spaces, or and I experienced that. The white women cry, and then the conversation tries to shut down, and then the Black woman speaks up, or the brown woman, and then actually another brown woman spoke up, and we both spoke up in the space. And it turns into this, like, why are you why are you beating us up kind of thing? Why are you making us feel bad? And everyone gets silent after that, right? And we're the aggressors, and we're the
Yeah.
angry people, and the angry Black woman trope. And uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And frankly, like yeah, I have so much anger around that whole thing because it's
Mhm.
really we have all been harmed so many times with that same scenario playing out. Same with me earlier this week with my friend. And we need to be able to talk about these things and not be worried about pacifying white folks' feelings, because if they feel bad, that's because they know that they or their ancestors have done something wrong. It's not because they're being called out on it. It's because they're being forced to face that pain, and they need to, but that's on them. That's not on us. We're
No.
facing our own pain and our own traumas. And, you know,
Absolutely.
you as a mom, single mom processing this, how was that? Did you have any partners? Did you have support at that time? Were you with your mom at the time? Like what was your support system?
Hmm. Yeah, I've definitely had a very unconventional life over the last, 17 years. I think first I was with my mom and my sister. And so my mom supported, and then my sister kind of became like a second mom to my son. And she helped with babysitting, and she helped on the weekends. And I would work creative hours, like, I'll work 4 to midnight so that I can be with him during the day. And then you'll take care of the family, takes care of him in the evening. And I'd work weekends. There was all of these things that we would do to kind of work together, until he could get into school, until he was at school age. And so
Right.
that was kind of my process. And then eventually I did have some partners throughout that process. And I guess I should, probably say that, obviously the biological father walked away. He never came back into, he walked away when I was 6 months pregnant and never came back into my son's life. And so we have definitely had a very unconventional story. And a big part of that has been being in relationships with people that were not the right fit, and having to go through, extensive therapy and figuring that out, because you see your traumas show up in romantic relationships. And
Yeah.
which, yeah, all of that leading to, I think, becoming an entrepreneur and being like, I need to be able to figure out how to care for my family in a way where I am not going to have to be dependent on someone.
Yeah. And, what you said about when you became a mom, that's when that, like, it's something clicked, right? You're like, your mama bear instincts, your like protective instincts. I felt that same transition when I had my daughter 4.5 years ago. And her pregnancy was extremely hard for me because I think all the traumas
Mhm.
somehow, I was really nauseous and fatigued, and I was had bleeding and whatnot, it forced me to slow down and think. Because before that, I would just bury myself in every extracurricular activities, had 2 jobs, so I didn't have to ever think about what had happened. And that's when time slowed down. I was forced to sit and be in my body. And it was like, I hated it. It was so hard for me. But now looking back at what a blessing and gift that time was and is, because if it wasn't for me becoming a mother, I don't know if I would have had the same desire to change and to like step into myself and like really authentically, right? And accept ourselves for who we are instead of trying to push it aside.
I agree. I think I grew up like having a lot of insecurities when I was young, giving away my power being taken from me, like in this kind of cyclical aspect of like feeling like I always had to change who I was and try to appease people and please people and, you know, all of that. And having my son definitely transformed that and helped me to start to see like like if you don't accept all of you,
Yes.
then you're never going to be able to be free. Like if there's parts of you that you need to hide because you're worried that if people find out about them, and that used to be my worry, if people really know about my story, like are they going to love me? Like, will they really truly love me if they know my story?
Yeah.
Will they judge my family dynamic, my son, because his biological father, you know, walked away when I was 6 months pregnant? Does that make us less worthy? Does that make us, you know, the stereotype of, you know, a Black family? And I was able to do this kind of transformational switch where I was like, I owned every part of that story. I was like, yep, that happened. Yep, that happened. These things happened to me. And I wouldn't wish them upon anybody, but they are a part of who I am. And I'm not ashamed of them anymore. I really feel like they have changed the trajectory of my life and allowed me to be more empathetic in the world and do the work that I do now in a really transformational way.
And what you just said about like that shame part, because that shame was never yours to hold anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's other people's shame to hold, but we internalize it as we did something wrong when we didn't, right? And I've been going through the same journey myself, is like if we can't accept, and you know what it was? It was my daughter. She's got a gift of seeing people for who they are. Like from my son doesn't have it, daughter does. I don't want to, maybe my son does, but like she will look at you and see you for who you are. And so when she was born, like our eyes connected and I felt naked. Like I felt like, wow, like she is seeing just me for me and accepting me for who I am. And nobody else, even my parents, have never done that. Because when I was born, they had expectations from the second I was born. My daughter had no expectations of me. And so that type of love and that type of like just looking at myself through her eyes and how she can just look at me with awe, even if I don't have makeup on and I'm a mess and I'm exhausted and I'm crying and all that stuff has really been healing to me. And I think that we sometimes as mothers and as parents, we talk about how hard it is, because it is hard, but like the joys and the gifts of motherhood is that, right? It's like there's nobody else could have given that to me, not my spouse, not my brother or anybody else. And I really value your own honesty in sharing your story, because it also destigmatizes those stories.
Yes.
Because those are just different ways, not even different, but just another way of being raised, right? Just like you could have been raised in a mansion up on top of a hill with a pool in your backyard, or you could have been raised somewhere else. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong, because there's lots of unhappy people who are wealthy and, grown up in those fancy houses too, and who have faced abuse, so we assume that they're better, but they're not. And it's kind of like a wake up call, like, oh, like these things can happen, and anywhere and everywhere. So I want to hear about body image a little bit, because we know, you and I both know how body, standards are Eurocentric, and what has been your own journey with that?
Yeah. Oh, wow. I think I did a post yesterday about it. There was someone sharing about, about the types of foods that we're supposed to eat. And, I remember going through this phase when I was younger on like diet culture and like, oh, I'm going to lose weight and I got to lose my bum, which is it's part of my cultural trait of being, Ethiopian, being African. I wish that my body could look different. And I remember going through this phase where I only juiced, only ate chicken breast and sweet potatoes, like
I
cut
saw
out
that.
all of the things, right?
Like that sounds awful.
I know. And was brainwashed and really conditioned and socialized to believe that my cultural food was bad, that Ethiopian food was bad, that Indian food was bad, that curries were bad, that stews were bad, that breads, that, rice. And so I think, growing up, I definitely had this perspective that my body was not the standard, right? I saw constantly the images of white women and this idea that, if you watch the show Friends, like we want our bodies to be like straight bodies like theirs. And, our bodies never look like that. I never saw that when I looked at my aunts and I looked at my mom and I looked at, my sisters and I looked at my family and my community, our bodies were so different. And I think I'm also fortunate. I don't know if you had this experience, but growing up in the 90s, we had a lot of cultural also immersion in seeing ourselves a lot too, and in our community. And so I think I was always in this like kind of dichotomy of this fight between like what the white supremacist, cis heteropatriarchal capitalist culture was telling me, and then like what I saw constantly with my family and friends and my community. In one way, I was told that I was beautiful because I had curves, and then another way, I was told that I was ugly, and so and I was fat. I was told that my whole life from the white cultural aspect,
Which is like, yeah.
And then I think that transformation, getting into the yoga world and not seeing any bodies that look like mine, like our bodies, and that was pretty intense. And so I think I've been through this like process of like decolonizing everything when it comes to body image, because now when we look around, look, the Kim K's and all of these people are stealing our bodies, like literally, white women are injecting their lips to have lips like ours. If I see another white woman with injected lips, I think I'm going to lose my mind. All these shows that I watch and I'm like, oh my gosh, they don't even know how to talk with their lips though. They're like, they can't talk
They're
properly.
like this. I know. And the thing is, like, people are so messed up because they're like, oh, we have right over our bodies. We can do whatever we want. And I'm like, okay, yes. But also that was never like your body. And like I don't know, because people will say, oh, well, it's not your right to judge or decide what other people do with their bodies. But also when you're co-opting people's natural traits and like cultural traits that are not yours.
And not only that,
why are you doing that?
And not only that, for me, for example, as a Black woman, I am dehumanized because of those traits.
The same traits.
Yeah. The same traits. I'm over sexualized. I'm told that I'm unattractive. I'm told that I'm masculine, like all of the ways in which our traits, we're told that we're unattractive and we're dehumanized, or we're more likely to be, over policed, or our communities are surveilled. Like we're seen as like irresponsible mothers because of the ways
told you're going to a nightclub and you're like, what?
Exactly. For just existing.
That's so harmful. And I do think I see a lot of thin white women struggling with body image, and I'm like, how fucked up is it that you're already the norm, but you struggle with body image? And this is why that diet culture and white supremacy doesn't benefit anybody, even white folks. And they don't understand that, or a lot of them don't understand that, because you're like, it's impacting you in some ways almost more. Because for me, like when I moved here, I was tiny. Like, a lot of Indian people are small, depending on where in India you're from. I was real thin, and I should have been in grade 6. And because I started school in India a year early. But the principal said, you're too small. I'll put you in grade 5 so you're not bullied. I was still the littlest in grade 5, and I didn't grow a lot in 1 year. But I was held back academically because of my size. And so for me, it was the other way. I was always too small. I started eating like a Canadian. I would drink 4 cups of milk, eat all the cheese. My face exploded in acne. my body's not used to eating foods like that. I stopped eating my cultural foods because I didn't want to smell in school. So I would just not eat. I would just not eat. And so people thought I was a picky eater and didn't like vegetables. I'm like, I love okra. I love cabbage. Like I love the way it's cooked in India or by like my home, my native foods. But I didn't like the idea of a garden salad with like a lettuce and tomato. And that's what other people saw as being vegetarian because I'm vegetarian and we didn't eat a lot of eggs or dairy. There was dairy in our sweets and our like some of our foods, but a lot of South Indian familial food is like a lot of it is vegan. And my experience with diet culture was trying to gain weight to try to fit in, to try to have a bit more curves. And, I never succeeded, obviously, until I had my second baby. And you know what's funny? Nobody tells me I'm too thin now. And I'm like, I finally have a belly. I finally have curves, right? And my mom's not harassing me to eat more. But this is the problem with diet culture. Why can't we just accept bodies the way they are? My mom is small. I'm small. My dad's small. What would I expect? Right? Like,
absolutely.
And the big boobs, like the big butt, like the whole injections and implants. And I'm like, that is not a white woman's body typically.
No. And it's like, that's fine. You have a time, you can do whatever you want with your body, but stop co-opting and stealing from Black culture.
Yes.
And using it as like a, currency in society. And that's what they do. We don't have the privilege to be able to do that. This is who we are. And it comes with consequences. And it comes with also culture and beauty and ancient like history. And you can't just take that and
you can't just like select it. Yeah. No,
yeah.
It's like yoga. I'm waiting for the day yoga is no longer trendy. I'm just waiting for it. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And it's going to decide it's old news. And like white folks will move on to the next thing. And I'm like,
oh yeah.
It's left a bad taste in my mouth because of how unwelcome I feel in yoga spaces. So I would practice it more. And now I'm starting to learn about like, okay, I can't let them decide what I do and like what cultural practices I continue practicing because there are spaces for people of color, run by people of color. And we need to find those spaces and elevate those spaces because we lose our ancient wisdom and the sacred practices that come with yoga. And it's not just stretching and flexibility. And I appreciate that you talk about that in your studio as well. And, decolonizing yoga and yoga industry standards that exist here. Can you talk about your journey now as, your child is growing up? You said he's going to university next year, right? And how is it now? Because your parenting journey is not done by any means. He still needs you in a big way, especially over the next 10 years or so. That I feel like until you're 25, 30, you're still a child,
Yeah.
What are you focusing on now?
Yeah. And I really appreciate you saying the part about him, them still being a child, because I think the Western Canadian white culture is like, okay, you're out, you're 18, get out. And, all right, you figure it out. Or their perspective is like, their parents go into retirement homes. I mean, anyway.
Yeah.
The point is like everyone just gets sent out and there's no community. So for me, I think I'm really excited that he's going to stay home for school and he's going to go to Laurier. He just got his G2 and so he's driving. So I'm excited for the autonomy he has. I'm worried also, for his safety. He wants to get involved in film and editing and the film world. And so I think what I'm trying to do is really support him in that field and helping him tap into what's possible for him, right? And I think our parents never had the ability to do that. And so I'm like, what can I do to help lift him up and build him up so that, we can go to there's a Black Toronto Film Festival coming. There's opportunity to go to Vancouver and do some things there. And he edited my course, which is really amazing.
What? That's incredible.
That was Jaleel. Like he did it. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So he has incredible talent. I think what I'm trying to help him understand. So even after all of these years of like working so hard to pour into him, all of the media aspect, like the people he would learn from are all white. And, you know, people probably listening to this are like, oh my gosh, they came back to race again. It's like,
It
well,
is.
it's
It is.
reality.
It's reality.
And you know, if you were a fly on the wall in our home, you would hear me saying to him every single day, like, Jaleel, we got to seek out people that you can be mentored by in this industry so that you don't continuously get socialized into thinking that your stories don't matter, that our stories don't matter, because you're going to be storytelling, you're going to be directing, you might be producing, you know, the next Black Panther or some other amazing film
Yeah.
or story or short film. And so I'm trying to support him in really reimagining for himself. Because at the end of the day, I know that intergenerational trauma is passed down, and he's like, I know he can do anything, but we still are, you know, amidst systemic racism and all the ways
Yes.
in which he's going to have to navigate university. And I'm like, child, I will come to your school. I will. These people know me in this community.
Yeah.
They know who I am. Mention your mother's name and use that as an opportunity to be able to hopefully be able to push through that.
Well, and I think that's the other part about the parenting. It's like you can do, I think about that too, is like you teach all this stuff at home, but the external environment, the schools, the daycares have such a powerful influence on your child. Like something is so simple. We eat with our hands, Indian food, right?
Amazing.
And why one day, Nisha, my daughter, comes home and only started eating with a spoon or fork. Like even like the stuff that is you're like, how do you even eat this with your spoon and fork? And
Yeah.
but she's been told every day at daycare, it's not clean to eat with your hands. But like they're not even saying it as like an insult to people who do eat with your hands, but it's these subtle things that are so
Mhm.
deeply harmful. So now I'm like, screw the cutlery. I'm like, we're making sure we really, and I'm like, you know, eating with my hands. Like it's just, it's a small thing, but it's a part of our traditions. And I think our kids are going to be dealing with that because they're still raised in that same white supremacist bubble. And as he grows up and becomes an adult, he'll probably do his own journey of unlearning too. And I think you've set him up for success in a way
Yes,
that maybe you didn't have because your parents didn't have the same opportunities and the same access and you know,
absolutely.
same
And
experiences as you.
I hope I can't wait till he gets to his angry Malcolm X stage. I'm really looking for that moment. You know, everybody goes to that moment of like, what? You know, and I mean, I've obviously, like you said, you know, we share with our children all of the things, right? They know about white supremacy and we talk to them about code switch, like they know all the things. But I think there's an internal awakening that has to happen for them where they go, oh, okay. You know, because I know he experiences from his white friends, you know, microaggressions, macroaggressions, which are really abuse, death by a thousand paper cuts, about his hair, about his, you know, all of that has
Yeah.
happened
Yeah.
for years. And I know that he also sometimes protects me from the things that happen because he knows I will show up. I will pull up to any space. And so I know he has to go through his own kind of like building of that awareness and that fire to wake up and go, oh yeah, enough is enough kind of thing.
And for him to just learn that he can advocate and like feel empowered to stand up and know that it's safe to do so, because that's the other thing is we're not going to stand up until we feel like, you know, okay, it is safe, I am protected. And that death by a thousand paper cuts is so accurate. And I had a big falling out this week with a friend who I've known for 22 years, and I think I briefly shared with you that. And um, it's actually, I don't think I'm hurt as much anymore. I think it was meant to be. It had to happen at some point because we've grown. I've grown, and she's still back in high school
Mhm.
phase. And ultimately, when people are not willing to see the impact of their hurt and harm, or even recognize that their actions as a nice person, quote unquote, can be so deeply harmful, intentionally or unintentionally, we can't change them. And they have to recognize that for themselves and do that journey themselves. And that's something that your course was deeply painful for me, just learning,
Yeah.
because I think that was necessary. Because it's not, you know, I know things from a brown Indian lens. And then there's like the black lens. And then there's the indigenous. And then like the Chinese and the Japanese and like all of the different
Yeah.
cultures and communities around the world that are so deeply impacted. And then we pretend like we're just fine and nothing happened. And you're like, but it did. And so I think there needs to be that pain in that learning So then you
Yeah.
can then start to come over to the other side and be like, okay, but what now? What can we change now? And what systems can we like speak up at? Like we went to our kids' daycare for Canada Day. Ashley, my partner, my spouse did, because we took your course together. And I'm like, I'm not doing the labor for every single time there's an issue of race or something,
Mhm.
because it is emotionally a lot.
Mhm.
And if we're parenting together,
Mhm.
this needs to be happening. So they put Canada flag tattoos on my kids, my daughter, the older kids, without asking our permission, I'm like, first of all, don't mark my kids' bodies with anything without my permission.
That
And they're like,
part.
oh, but she was excited. I'm like, she's a kid. She wants to be included. Of course she's excited. Everyone else is doing it. But she's 3. Like, let's, and we talked about, we don't celebrate Canada Day. We
Mhm.
talked about we just talked about the Indigenous, the harm and hurt, and suddenly the next day we're just in celebration mode. And anyways, that was a conversation that my husband had with them. Whether they are going to change it for next year, I don't know, but they won't touch our kids with tattoos anymore. That's
That
for sure.
part.
And then teaching your kids why they're not necessarily being excluded, but that's an inclusion that we don't want to be part of.
Mhm. That's why we have to clarify what we mean by inclusion
Yeah.
and diversity and all of this language that's been tokenized now and, co-opted. What do we even mean by that?
Yeah.
And, there's a cognitive dissonance around the colonial amnesia that they want us to all stay under,
Yes.
because they benefit from that. When we stay under the colonial amnesia and we are just not aware, we're numb, and we smile and we do racism with a smile and we accept these spaces, which is survival. It's not our fault. So, we've had to assimilate, we've had to survive. But the reality is, like, when we start to become aware and we go through that painful experience, like you shared, through, doing that kind of unlearning and relearning and looking at it, it ignites something in you. It wakes up something in you. It wakes up pain. It wakes up trauma. But it also is like a reminder, like, oh, they've lied to me my whole life. And I get to reclaim back my
Exactly.
culture and reclaim all the things we talked about today: body image, standards, food, how we eat. I always say that, like, why do we even sit at tables in the way that we do? Like we're all
Yeah,
British royalty.
I
It's
know.
like,
I tell
in
my
our
clients, I'm
culture.
like, eat breakfast on the floor, because like we need mobility and you're always sitting, like sit in different surface, different place. Like everything is so, you're right. It's insidious in everything we do. And like, even just the act of like, when I show up at a friend's house, I don't want you to have to clean for me and give this big, I just want to feel like family. Right. But with
Mhm.
like the whiteness, it's like, oh, well, I have to know 3 months in advance so I can clean up. And I'm like, this is not friendship anymore. This is a business appointment. Like, like,
Mhm.
let's just take that facade off and be human. And I think that, I showed my husband this video of like a Diwali celebrations in India. And I'm like, see the joy, this
Mm.
joy, this joy. Can you tell me one white celebration that has this much joy?
Yeah, and no. And you know what? Fine, maybe Oktoberfest, but Oktoberfest is like a
It's
drinking,
drinking. Yeah.
barrage.
When you're
Yeah,
drunk, everything's fun, right? Like,
exactly.
yeah.
And I feel the same way. Like in Ethiopian culture, it's like I share a lot of,
And I love that
obviously
you do.
a
I'm
lot,
grateful that you
because
do.
to
Yeah.
me, it like protects me. I'm like, here's information about white supremacy. I'm going to say white supremacy 15 times today, but I'm going to continuously like integrate
Your
my
joy.
my joy in it, because I made a decision a while ago after burning out multiple times. Like, I'm
Yes.
not going to be a mule to white supremacy's awakening. That is not my job. Like, my job is to impact my community. My job is to heal. My job is to support my son in intergenerational healing, to break those intergenerational cycles. My job is to thrive. My job is to be empowered. My job is to live a full and full and thriving life. And, on top of that, I will teach. I love to teach. I know I'm called to do that, but it's not going to be at the expense of my own well-being.
Yes.
And I think I'm grateful that I've been brought up in a culture where we know how to do two things, which I know your culture does too. Our cultures all do, Black and brown cultures and Indigenous cultures. We know how to mourn and we know how to have joy.
Yes.
We are not disconnected from our humanity. And I think what comes, the culture of white supremacy and colonialism, in order to be able to perpetuate that type of violence for hundreds and hundreds of years, you have to disconnect from your humanity.
Yes.
And that's what we see here, this kind of capitalistic white supremacist, like very, cannot dance. Sorry.
I will tell you,
dance society.
I have two kids, and one has my genes for dance and one doesn't. And I'm like, I got to teach her, because this is like, dance is like, just, I'm not amazing at it, but it's just part of my life, and it's, you just, the rhythm and the feel and the music. And, it's interesting because I shared just my experience this week. Somebody messaged me on Instagram that a friend of one of my best friends that I known for 22 years. This other person messaged me asking me how to pronounce a name. Hey, Monday morning. Hey, can you just tell me how to pronounce this name? I'm like, excuse me? I'm like, am I an encyclopedia? Am I Google? Am I the authority on name pronunciation? Am I the authority on every single thing Indian? And let me tell you this, that name was not Indian. And I said, there are 1.3 billion Indian people. There's millions of names and ways to pronounce names. And I said, this is not a question for me. And I'm like, why don't you just ask the person? Like, you want to know something, ask. Oh, and she's a real estate agent. And she's like, oh, well, I would, but some excuse. And I just said like, no, look it up. And then she's like, haha, hope you weren't offended. Sorry. And I said, you knew that I was going to be offended because you're saying that. And I said, I'm like, actually, I'm really surprised you asked me this question. This is not appropriate. I'm not Google. And I just left it at that. And I messaged my friend to inform her that her friend had done this. And the way my friend reacted was, initially it was like, oh, like, sorry, that wasn't appropriate. But, you do talk about name pronunciation. And, I guess when you follow someone on social media, it seems like they get to know you or whatever. And I was like, even if my husband came and asked me random questions like that, I would have thought it was weird. And I said, I was like, I don't need justifications. I need an apology and an acknowledgement of the harm. And a friend should be able to hold space like that, and also have a conversation with your white friend to stop doing this kind of shit. And so that her reaction was very telling. But the worst part was her husband then messaging me the next day, gaslighting me and tone policing me and calling me, condescending, and then asking me not to tell his wife about it.
Wow.
I was like, this happens to nice white people. This is literally somebody I would have called family, 22-year friendship. But this is how they see me, and how they, that they don't really see me as an equal human. So why are we investing time into relationships like this? And for anyone who's a Black, brown person of color listening to this, I know you've had experiences like this with white friends. I know for a fact every single person has. You do not need to put up with that kind of space where you're not seen for your humanity. And take Selam's course, because you'll learn. That's where I started learning. I was like, you know what? I have control over who I have around my life. Maybe my parents didn't when they moved here. Maybe I didn't as a kid. I was stuck in, the circles I was. But now I have children. I have to be protective of them and my own space and my mental health. And I'm really, like, that course changed my life. And I don't say that lightly. Because the healing, it was really painful, like during some of those, like just the lectures, and you're like, because we didn't learn about this in school. And I wish we did, because kids need to learn it, not so that they can hold that trauma in them, but so that they know what was actually happening, and so that they don't repeat these mistakes over and over. White people need to learn this so that they recognize what their history is, their parents' grandparents' history is. And maybe they can also recognize why they're so disconnected with themselves and their joy and their, like you said, their grief too. I have a few questions for yourselves, but one thing that I did want to ask is, as a mother to a Black child, Black boy especially, what are some of the things that you have had to teach him that somebody who's white, even somebody who's brown, probably does not have to teach their boys that? And this is something that I ask because everyone says their mothering is hard. Being a mom is hard, but it's not the same type of hard for everyone.
No. Yeah. I mean, I think, we're very deliberate about the fact that he's driving And that's a huge thing. It's like, okay, what are the things that we always talk about? We always do a check-in. Okay, so you're going to go out. If this happens, if you get pulled over, what do you say first? What do you do with your hands? Like, what are you going to communicate? And so that's a big one, obviously, recently that we've been dealing with. But, another part is like when he goes to friends' houses, it's like, don't go into and don't wander into any other rooms, even like you're being a kid and like you're playing and I know that you're not doing anything harmful, but like you may be accused of something. So, making sure that you're not wandering in any other spaces, making sure that you're extra nice and saying thank you and saying please and all of that, because of the ways in which they try to, deem our children, our Black boys as criminal, really. If you're going out with your friends and y'all are at the mall, making sure that, you do not put your hands in your pockets, making sure that when you're in stores that you're careful, that you're aware. If you're friends and y'all want to go out, because he's a teenager and he should be able to, make mistakes.
Socialize. Yeah. He should be allowed to make mistakes. Yeah.
But there's a hypervigilance that he has to be aware of, because of the fact that if his white friends decide that they want to, do something and have fun or be, do something funny as a teenager, it's like, you're the one that's going to be targeted if security or police or a Karen or a Ken, the policing white people of the community, see you. And so I think it's things like that, but it's also like him going into the film world. And I remember us having like it was a heart to heart, and I felt sad, and I felt like I have to do this. I have to teach my son this. I was saying to him, like, as he was developing content, I was saying, like, it's important for you to be aware, like, if you create, like, the difference between creating things that like are rooted in who you are or projecting the socialization of whiteness, right, in your storytelling.
Yeah.
And he was like, but mommy, like, why can't I, it's a couple years ago, like, why do I have to think about this? My friends don't have to think about this. When they're creating as content creators and doing media and editing and directing and writing scripts, like, they don't have to think about all this. And I was like, I know, kiddo, and I'm sorry, but this is a reality.
Yeah.
And, we've had so many hard conversations like that, where his white friends are able to do certain things. And for us, we don't. Culturally, there's things culturally we won't do. White parents often let their children, do a lot of things at very young ages in their homes and drink and smoke. And I'm like, we can't let that happen.
Yeah.
And I want you to have autonomy and I want you to have freedom, but I also need to ensure you're safe.
Safe. Yeah. And I think that's the part that as a kid, I was rebelling as a teen, and as a brown girl, I wish that I did listen to my parents more, because they didn't necessarily have heart to hearts. It was more of a control, like, listen to us or else, that's it. And I did many stupid things that I really wish I didn't do. Scenarios I got myself into, was taken advantage of, because I was trying to fit in. And I think it's so important that you're having these conversations with him. I know they're hard, because it's going to hopefully protect him too, from also, growing up and be like, oh, I've just been storytelling. I've just been creating from a white lens, and I am taking myself out of the equation, because his expertise and his view is his expertise, right? Like, his opinion matters. There's 1,000 other white, creators out there. And even as a physio, right? Like, as a physio, as a pregnancy and postpartum fitness coach, my content is different than the other 1,000, Sarahs and white physios out there. And, people will be like, wow, your content's really good. I'm like, that's because you're not used to seeing content from a non-white lens. That's why you're seeing it and you're like, oh, because I'm talking about things not in a different way, but in a way that's authentic to me. And I'm really, I'm sure you're so proud of your son. And I know he's going to grow up and be like, I'm so damn proud of my mother, because what you have been doing for him and done as a single mother. And you're not just impacting his life, you're impacting your whole community and everybody who knows you in the online space and through your courses. Endless gratitude to you, honestly.
Thank you.
I have some final thoughts I want to ask you about yourself and your every day. What are you reading right now? What's your favorite book, your favorite podcast? What do you recommend?
So what am I'm not reading anything specific right now, but I think when I think about a book that I really love recommending in terms of like parenthood
Yeah.
is I would say Between the World and Me, Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think that book broke my heart open and was like, he is like a poet. And yeah, that book is an incredible book for I think anyone, but especially Black parents that are listening to this podcast, and all parents to listen to.
Nice. And that I'll put that on my list. I love reading in the fall and winter. I don't really read in the summer because it's go outside more, but I'll put that on my list. And how about what do you do on a daily basis for self-care? What do you prioritize? 3 rituals or 3 things that you do to hold space for yourself?
Well, I'm trying to now like nightly do like a nightly journal. And so I'm trying to like write down my thoughts. I listen to like an inspirational video. And this sounds corny to some folks, but it really helps me. But it's Oprah. And there's these words
I
that
love
she
Oprah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And there's a video and it's the same one. It's literally the same one almost every single time. But it's like, for me, it's like, I feel like I'm trying to lay down new neural pathways in my mind. And that's, instead of all of these, patriarchal white self-development books that I read for so many years, I'm trying to like reprogram, my mind to start listening to her voice and her experiences. I feel deeply connected to her childhood and the things that happened to her. And so, yeah, Oprah and journaling.
Nice. And one thing that I wanted to say about that is the self-development books, I've always liked that too, even since I was a teenager. My parents like it too. But you're right, they're all white voices. And even like words like, I'm a people pleaser, but I'm like, are you a people pleaser or a white people pleaser? Like that's a difference, right? Like there's so many like, imposter syndrome. And I'm like, I've never felt like an imposter. It's just that I'm never represented. So I don't feel like I belong. Like there's a difference, right? I don't doubt that I can step up and show up. It's just, we learn these key phrases and things that women deal with. And I'm like, I don't resonate with that messaging because the reason I feel like I don't belong is very different than imposter syndrome.
Exactly. And when white women and men and non-binary folks write books about, from their perspective and their lens and try to, market it as like for everyone.
For everyone. Yeah.
It's not true, right? It's not true. It's for a white audience. Be honest about that. Take accountability for that, because our experiences are dramatically different in society. And so, yeah, listening to Black and Brown voices in everything I do now is really key for me to be able to, do that healing.
Yeah. Yeah. And what are you passionate about right now? What's something that's like new or old or anything? What's your main passion right now?
What am I passionate about right now? I think I'm passionate about right now, I'm passionate about joy. I think I'm really trying to live out joy in like regardless of all of the things and in spite of all of the things. And so practicing joy, I think I had my 40th birthday recently and I had 90s R&B DJ. I had like
that looked amazing. That looked so much fun. And I love that. Joy doesn't have to be on pause because of other things that are happening, right? Like I always think about that. Flowers are still blooming, even if there's a war. Like, there's still flowers blooming. Nature still keeps going on. And like, we need to keep experiencing joy and love. And
if you look at other cultures, like our cultures across the globe, the global majority, work does not come first. Never. Community comes first. Connection comes first. And so we also internalize that white supremacy capitalist culture where we start to become these people where we're just like working to live. And then we get home and then we don't have energy. And then it's like, oh, it's hump day, Wednesday, and then Friday, and then Wednesday. And it's like, I am like trying to decolonize myself and get back to that place. Or, I don't know if I was ever there, but I know that I experienced it growing up, that essence. And I know what it feels like to go back home, to go to Ethiopia and experience that when, everybody's like, I remember going to Ethiopia and being like, okay, but we got to be there on time, like at 12.
Yeah.
And everybody was like, chikarayalam in our culture, like in our language means like, it's not a big deal. Yeah. Like we're good.
Yeah. that's, I'm like, being on time is stressful to me because my my family, we never were on time for anything. And it stresses me out because everything is so timely here. And I'm like, listen, if I want to meet my friends for dinner, don't yell at me if I'm 5-10 minutes late. This is now becoming a stressful thing instead of a fun thing. And it's a very like white thing, right? And it's also common in Black, brown, folks who also are living in that white supremacist lens. They get upset about lateness and this. And I'm like,
Yeah, my dad was like that. My dad definitely was like he internalized that kind of professionalism.
yes,
And I had this, and then my mom was the complete opposite. My mom was like, did not, and so it was like, oh, and I fought myself on that. I thought that I was a bad person or that I was
same.
disrespectful for so many years,
Yeah,
until I started to realize, like, now they have all these conversations around deconstructing and time is an illusion. I'm like, oh, really? So now y'all are going to start talking about, changing work cultures and changing the ways in which we look at time. It's like, I think all of the things that I used to reject or I thought was bad about
same. Our
I'm
cultures.
like
Yeah,
reclaiming it. It's like, obviously I'm
same.
not going to be disrespectful, but it's not that big of a deal.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I feel. I'm like, it's not an emergency. Don't feel like, the world is ending. And the other thing is like, I remember like with that, this is how I see it. Many parts of the world colonized, stole traditions, stole food, spices, cultures, women, changed North America, Western culture. And then now in India, they're copying Western culture. They're eating like us here. They're copying things. But now here we're learning, Eastern culture, they were right. And now what's going to happen in 50 years is back home in India, they're going to start realizing that their ancient ways were right. But like
Yeah.
that damage, like I see my cousins eating like food, like cheese dosas. Like, I don't know, you don't
Yes.
make cheese in dosa. I'm sorry. You cannot do that. And it's just like they're just copying the Western because they believe that we're better. Just like my parents believe that it's a better world here and a better opportunities. And I'm like, you've been fed a lie. And I think even on sharing on social media, I have a lot of Indian followers, and I hope they see that coming here is not going to guarantee them anything.
Mm-mm.
It's not.
No. If anything, if anything, it's a huge sacrifice. You give up a lot.
You give up
You give
so
up
much. I
you give up.
still today miss community. I still feel part of me is we live in an area where there's a lot of Chinese, Korean, Persian, but not a lot of Indians. And I feel like I miss community. And so I've started to go to the temple more often, even though there's not as many like young youth, but there's still the sense of community and the clothing. My daughter, for the first time, wanted to wear Indian clothes. And that was really healing for me because I felt like it's really important for my children to also love and embrace, their Indian heritage. Um, and yeah, thank you for sharing that. Now, if you could change anything about the world, what would it be? I feel like I already know the answer, but
Can we reverse the last 500 years of
I know.
white supremacy colonialism that destroyed the earth, exploited, extracted, and, where we're now all in therapy as Black and brown, and racialized and Indigenous people for the internalized racism that we've experienced. I think the world is a little bit of a dumpster fire right now in
Yes.
terms of white men continuously destroying the world. And I think that what I wish more than anything, if I could change things, is that our children will have a different vision for themselves and will not have to fight as hard as we've had to fight.
Yeah.
And so I think that's my greatest, highest, vision and purpose for our next generation.
I love that. And I hope that happens. I think we are part of the change, and I hope that we create pathways for our children and for our children's children to live in a better, more healing environment and space. And I think even Mother Earth, right? Like even the earth itself is crying, right? Like we have harmed the earth so much through
Yeah.
our exploitation and capitalism and excess everything. Um, yeah, that's a great wish. Um, and I hope that we will get there. Um, what would you say is your mom's strength?
Mm. I think my mom's strength is really owning my own story, like owning it to the point where it's transformative, and really releasing layers and layers of shame. And I think folks used to say to me like, oh, like, does Jaleel feel bad about himself because he doesn't have his biological father in his life? It's like, no, but we normalized those conversations from the moment he could speak.
Yeah.
So it was never a taboo thing, and he knows about all the things that have happened to me, so I've never hid those things from him, so that in obviously age appropriate ways.
Yeah,
But I think
absolutely.
that it's been a journey of like reclaiming all of who I am,
Yeah.
and realizing the parts of myself that I used to think was too much is
Yeah.
actually my superpower.
Yeah.
When it's placed in the direction of good. And so I think it's the ability to be able to mirror back to my son that I'm a human being.
Yeah.
I don't think my mom or my dad could do that for me.
No.
Our parents could not, because they were in survival and they were in teaching mode. And so although I teach a lot to my son, I feel like I'm also able to mirror back to him my humanity, and the fact that I'm also a mother, but I'm also a
You're
human
also
being.
human. Yeah. And I think that's something that I wish, my mom had done for me, is just told me, oh, I've been through this too. Instead of that feeling of I'm the authority figure and you have to just listen to me. We're perfect and you're the one making mistakes. And that was part of the type of environment that I grew up in. And that was probably part of the colonialism and
Huh?
the like patriarchy, model too. So I love that. You are an amazing, incredible person. And you have touched so many people that you probably will never know because of the work that you do, and also the fullness, the wholeness in the ways that you actually embrace who you are. I'm thinking about some parts of myself that I have never talked about. And I'm like, huh, why do I still hold shame there? Because
Mm.
it's not my shame to hold. And, even just this conversation is very healing. And I'm so excited for people to hear it and connect with you if they don't already know you, and to continue just learning and engaging with you. If people want to find you or hang out with you or connect with you, where's the best place? And if they want to learn from you, where's the best place?
So first, I just want to say thank you, Surabhi. You're such an incredible, your voice, first of all, in the anti-racism course was so incredible. And I remember being like, yes, Surabhi's here. Like, you're going to say all the things. And you came in. I know there's a lot of emotional labor that came with that, but also your heart and your spirit, your voice was so fierce. So I'm just totally in love with everything that you're doing. And I love watching your videos and how you inspire people. So thank you. Thank you for everything that you do. Um, but folks can find me on salamdebs.com. That's my website. They can also go to Instagram at Selam Debs, and Facebook for the same thing. Everywhere, everything is basically Selam Debs. If you look me up,
Perfect.
you'll be able to find me.
Perfect. And when's your next round of your anti-racism course coming out?
So the anti-racism course, the cohort will begin the first week of January.
Amazing. I 100% recommend it. It has been transformational. It was actually perfectly timed for me because I felt like I went in to myself for a while and let it sit and let it kind of just work through me. And, just being kind with ourselves, especially for anyone who is Black, Indigenous, brown, racialized, just having the compassion for ourselves, because we didn't ask to be put in these situations, but we have had to deal with it time and time again. I didn't ask to wake up Monday morning and have that random message. I didn't ask for that, but yet we're dealing with it and we're dealing with the aftermath. And having the tools, the language that you teach, it's more than the language, the understanding of like why we got here, how we got here, and the communities that it impacts so much more. I see a lot of, and I can say this because I'm Indian, Indian people will feel sorry for themselves, but I'm like, you also understand that there are other communities that face it much more and in a more damaging, unsafe way. So yes, and right, like it's like, yes, we're dealing with this, and we also need to be accountable and speak out so that even when we're uncomfortable, that's what I prioritize now. I'm like, I'm uncomfortable in this scenario, but this person may then go on to harm somebody else. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm thinking. And that's not okay. And it's just helped me find my voice more. So thank you so much. Thank you for this conversation. Lots of love to you and lots of joy to you as well. So if you're listening to this conversation and you loved it, please tag us on Instagram, share it with a friend, share it with everybody in your life who needs to learn, grow, and be inspired.
Thank you.